In April of 1986, an explosion changed the course of history forever. The disaster forced an entire city to evacuate within hours, leaving behind homes, toys, photographs, and the quiet lives of nearly 50,000 people. That city was Pripyat, located just a few kilometers away from the reactor that failed during the catastrophic Chernobyl disaster. Today, more than 3 decades later, the buildings still stand frozen in time inside the forbidden territory known as the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Nature has slowly reclaimed the streets. Trees grow through cracked concrete and rusted amusement rides sway gently in the wind. But the most disturbing thing about Pripyat is not the radiation. It's the silence. Experts monitoring the exclusion zone claim the ruins are empty. A lifeless monument to one of humanity's worst nuclear accidents. Yet in recent years, drone operators, security patrols, and urban explorers have reported encounters that challenge that belief. Strange figures appearing in thermal scans. Unexplained voices echoing through abandoned corridors. Movements detected in places where human presence is strictly forbidden. Some of these incidents occur deep within the restricted red zones, areas considered too dangerous even for experienced investigators. Places where radiation levels remain unpredictable, and where something else may have quietly taken residence. Tonight, we are examining 3 disturbing encounters reported inside the most restricted sectors of Pripyat. These are not decades-old legends told by tourists or ghost hunters. These accounts come from modern investigations, recorded using advanced equipment designed to detect heat signatures, electromagnetic disturbances, and environmental anomalies within the zone. Yet despite the technology, each encounter leaves investigators with the same terrifying conclusion. Something is moving through these ruins, and it doesn't appear to belong to the living world. Before we begin, ask yourself something important. If an entire city was abandoned overnight, what happens to the energy left behind? Do places remember the tragedies that occurred within them? Or could isolation, radiation, and decades of silence create something far stranger, something capable of watching those who dare to enter the ruins? Tonight, we explore 3 real encounters that took place inside the restricted sectors of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. One recorded deep beneath the basement of an abandoned hospital. Another captured near the silent Ferris wheel that never opened to the public. And the final encounter reported within the infamous Red Forest, where even seasoned patrol teams refused to walk alone after sunset. But before we uncover what happened in those locations, make sure you subscribe to True Terror Files, official for more real horror investigations and unexplained encounters from around the world. Because once you hear these stories, you might start to wonder whether the people who fled Pripyat were escaping something far more terrifying than radiation. Now let's begin with the first encounter. In the silent ruins of Pripyat, there are buildings that investigators refuse to enter alone. One of those places is the abandoned hospital that once treated the first victims of the catastrophic Chernobyl disaster. In 2026, a small monitoring crew was sent into the lower levels of the building to inspect structural damage and radiation, levels that had recently spiked inside the basement corridor. Among the team was a technician named James, a man who had spent years working in hazardous environments and had developed a reputation for remaining calm under pressure. He carried a Geiger counter, a thermal camera, and a digital audio recorder designed to detect unusual electromagnetic interference. As the team descended the cracked concrete stairs, the Geiger counters began clicking louder with every step. The deeper they moved into the basement, the more the sound echoed through the narrow hallway like a mechanical heartbeat. The air felt unusually heavy, and the walls were stained with decades of decay. Yet something about the atmosphere felt wrong, an unnatural silence that seemed to swallow every sound the moment it was made. James switched on the thermal scanner as the team reached the hospital morgue corridor. The room had once held rows of metal drawers where bodies were stored during emergencies. Now the drawers were rusted and partially open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. The scanner's display showed cold blue tones across most surfaces, which was expected in an abandoned concrete structure. But as James slowly moved the camera across the far wall, the device suddenly detected something unusual. A faint heat signature appeared near the corner of the room, shaped roughly like a tall human silhouette. At first, James assumed the scanner had picked up residual heat from one of his teammates. But when he turned around, he realized the rest of the crew was standing several meters behind him near the doorway. The heat signature remained in the same spot, motionless, as if someone invisible was standing silently against the wall. James stared at the screen, trying to understand what he was seeing. The display flickered slightly, then stabilized again. The silhouette remained there perfectly still, creating the unmistakable outline of a shadow figure that should not have been there at all. The team gathered around James to examine the reading. One of the investigators suggested it might be a reflection from nearby equipment. Another believed the scanner could be reacting to irregular radiation pockets trapped in the concrete. But none of those explanations accounted for what happened next. As James continued recording, the heat signature shifted slightly, as though the figure had taken a single step forward. The movement was subtle, but undeniable. The shape grew clearer on the display, revealing a head, shoulders, and long arms hanging beside its body. The room itself remained completely empty to the naked eye. No footsteps echoed across the floor, no shadows moved along the walls. Yet the thermal camera showed the figure standing there in unmistakable detail. That was the moment the team heard the first sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping echoed from somewhere deep inside the basement. Tap, tap, tap. The noise repeated slowly, almost like the steady rhythm of a human heartbeat echoing through the walls. The tapping sound grew louder as the investigator stood frozen in the corridor. James lifted the audio recorder, focusing on the direction where the noise seemed strongest. The sound didn't appear to be coming from the pipes or ceiling structures above them. Instead, it seemed to originate from the far corner of the morgue room, exactly where the thermal scanner showed the mysterious silhouette. One of the crew members whispered that it might be water dripping through the old pipes. But the pattern of the sound remained too precise, too deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm matched almost perfectly with the pulse rate displayed on James's wrist monitor. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped several degrees within seconds. The thermal scanner reacted instantly, flooding the display with shifting colors as cold air spread across the floor. But strangely, the figure on the screen did not disappear. Instead, the silhouette appeared to grow darker, more defined, as if it were absorbing the surrounding cold. That was when James noticed something else on the screen. The shape had turned slightly toward the camera, its head angled directly in his direction. The team suddenly felt the unmistakable sensation that something inside the room was now watching them. Panic spread quietly through the group as they backed away toward the hallway entrance. James continued recording until the thermal image began flickering violently across the display. For a brief moment, The silhouette appeared closer than before, standing only a few feet away from where the team had been standing seconds earlier. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the heat signature vanished from the scanner completely. The tapping sound stopped. The room returned to its original empty silence. The crew quickly exited the basement and reported the anomaly to their monitoring headquarters inside the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Later analysis of the footage confirmed that the thermal scanner had indeed recorded a distinct human-shaped heat pattern moving through the morgue corridor. Yet no person had been present in the room at the time. To this day, James refuses to review the recording alone, because in the final frame before the scanner shut down, a faint outline briefly appeared near the doorway, suggesting that whatever had been standing in the morgue might have followed them out into the hall. And inside the silent ruins of Pripyat, some investigators now believe the hospital basement may still contain something that never left after 1986, something waiting patiently in the darkness. In the center of the abandoned city of Pripyat, there stands a symbol of a day that never came. The famous Ferris wheel inside the silent amusement park. It was built to celebrate a festival in 1986, but just days before the grand opening, the catastrophic Chernobyl disaster forced the entire city to evacuate. The rides never operated, the music never played, and the laughter of children never filled the park. For nearly 4 decades, the Ferris wheel has stood frozen in place, its yellow metal structure slowly rusting under rain and radioactive dust. In 2026, a small group of licensed investigators entered the amusement park sector to record environmental data for a research project. Among them was Elijah, a documentary cameraman known for filming abandoned locations inside restricted territories. His job that day was simple: capture footage of the park's structural decay and document the effects of nature reclaiming the once busy playground. But what Elijah's camera recorded that afternoon would leave the entire crew questioning whether the park was truly as empty as it appeared. As Elijah approached the Ferris wheel with his camera running, the entire area seemed eerily calm. The wind moved gently through the surrounding trees, and the tall grass beneath the ride swayed quietly in the afternoon breeze. Yet something felt deeply unsettling about the atmosphere. The amusement park should have been filled with ordinary environmental noise-creaking metal, shifting branches, distant birds, but instead, there was an unnatural silence hanging over the entire area. Elijah slowly circled the base of the Ferris wheel, capturing wide shots of the empty gondolas hanging motionless above him. Each carriage rocked slightly in the wind, producing faint metallic groans that echoed across the deserted park. Then something strange happened. One of the gondolas near the top of the structure began moving differently from the others. While the rest of the ride swayed gently with the wind, this particular carriage rotated slowly on its own axis, as though someone inside had shifted their weight. Elijah zoomed his camera lens toward the gondola, expecting to see a loose hinge or damaged support causing the unusual motion. But as the camera focused on the carriage, the movement became even more disturbing. The gondola stopped rotating completely for several seconds. Then, without warning, the entire Ferris wheel structure shifted slightly, producing a loud grinding sound that echoed through the park. The massive wheel began to rotate slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. The investigators immediately stepped back in shock. The Ferris wheel had been stationary for decades, its mechanical system rusted and disconnected from any power source. Yet the enormous structure was now turning as though an invisible force had pushed it into motion. The gondolas creaked loudly as they began moving around the wheel, casting long, swinging shadows across the ground. The team stared upward in disbelief as the ride completed nearly half of a full rotation. For a moment, the abandoned amusement park no longer looked like a lifeless ruin. It looked like something had activated it. While Elijah continued filming, another piece of equipment suddenly detected an unusual signal. One of the researchers had brought a high-frequency audio sensor capable of recording electronic voice phenomena. The device began producing faint bursts of static while the Ferris wheel continued turning slowly overhead. Elijah lowered his camera toward the recorder to capture the sound. At first, it seemed like random interference caused by nearby radiation pockets. But when the audio was later analyzed, investigators discovered something chilling hidden within the static bursts. Beneath the distortion, faint voices could be heard whispering in overlapping tones. The words were difficult to identify clearly, but several investigators agreed they sounded eerily similar to distant children laughing. The sound repeated briefly before fading back into silence. As the voices stopped, the Ferris wheel above them slowed down just as suddenly as it had begun moving. Within seconds, the ride came to a complete stop again, leaving the gondolas hanging perfectly still in the air. The team immediately decided to leave the area after reviewing the footage on Elijah's camera. None of the investigators could explain how the Ferris wheel had moved without any mechanical power source connected to it. Even strong wind would not have been capable of rotating the massive structure in such a controlled motion. But the most disturbing detail appeared in the final seconds of Elijah's recording. As the camera panned across the gondolas one last time, something briefly appeared inside one of the upper carriages. The shape looked like a dark human outline sitting quietly inside the seat. The camera angle shifted before the figure could be clearly identified, and when Elijah zoomed back toward the gondola again, the seat appeared empty. Yet investigators reviewing the footage frame by frame later discovered a chilling detail. The shape inside the carriage seemed small, almost childlike. In the abandoned amusement park of Pripyat, some believe the Ferris wheel may occasionally move not because of wind or mechanical failure, but because something unseen still remembers the day the park was supposed to open. Just outside the silent ruins of Pripyat lies one of the most dangerous locations on Earth, the Red Forest. After the catastrophic Chernobyl disaster, radiation turned the trees in this area a deep reddish color before they eventually died and collapsed. Even today, the soil contains dangerously high levels of contamination. Because of this, patrol teams monitoring the restricted sectors rarely spend long periods inside the forest. In the summer of 2026, a routine security patrol was assigned to inspect an isolated sector near an old bunker entrance buried deep within the trees. Among the patrol members was William, a veteran field technician who had spent years working in hazardous zones. The team entered the forest shortly before sunset, wearing protective suits and carrying radiation monitors that clicked constantly as they walked. At first, the forest seemed completely empty. No birds, no insects, no wind moving through the branches. Just an overwhelming silence stretching through the dying trees. The patrol moved deeper along a narrow dirt path that cut through the forest floor. Their Geiger counters clicked rapidly, echoing softly beneath the thick canopy of branches above them. As they approached the location of the abandoned bunker entrance, something strange caught William's attention. Faint sounds drifted through the forest ahead of them. First, the noise seemed like distant echoes bouncing between the trees. But as the team stopped to listen carefully, the sounds became clearer. It was the unmistakable sound of children laughing and talking somewhere deeper inside the forest. The patrol members looked at each other in confusion. The Red Forest was one of the most restricted areas in the entire exclusion zone. Yet the voices sounded real playful and energetic, like children running through a playground. The laughter echoed between the trees in short bursts, followed by faint footsteps crunching through the dry leaves. One of the team members whispered nervously that it must be a radio transmission or distant hikers outside the restricted boundary.
Ow.
But William knew something about the sound felt deeply wrong. The voices seemed to move unpredictably, sometimes close, sometimes far away, as if something was mimicking human speech from different directions at once. The patrol continued forward cautiously until they reached a small clearing near the bunker entrance. The concrete structure was partially buried beneath layers of soil and fallen branches, its heavy steel door locked shut decades earlier.
Ow.
The voices had stopped completely by the time the team stepped into the clearing. Once again, the forest returned to that suffocating silence. William began scanning the ground with a handheld radiation detector when he noticed something unusual in the dust covering the forest floor. A series of small footprints stretched across the clearing toward the bunker door. The prints were unmistakably human, but far smaller than those of an adult. Each footprint appeared bare, without the pattern of shoes or boots. The patrol member stared down at the marks in disbelief. Walking barefoot inside the Red Forest would expose a person to extreme radiation within minutes. Yet the footprints looked fresh, as though they had been made only moments earlier. William slowly followed the trail of prints toward the bunker entrance, while the rest of the team kept watch behind him. The footprints stopped directly in front of the heavy steel door, but strangely, there were no prints leading away from it. It was as though whoever or whatever had walked across the clearing had simply vanished once, reaching the bunker. As the team examined the door, something else happened that made the situation even more disturbing. From somewhere deep within the forest, the faint sound of children's laughter returned again. But this time the voices sounded closer. The laughter echoed softly behind the patrol members, as if something was standing just beyond the tree line. William turned quickly, scanning the dark forest with his flashlight. The beam of light moved across the trees, revealing nothing but twisted trunks and drifting dust particles in the air. Yet the laughter continued briefly before fading away again. The team suddenly realized something terrifying. The voices were not coming from the clearing ahead of them anymore. They were coming from behind them. The patrol immediately decided to leave the area after documenting the footprints and recording the strange audio. As they walked back toward their vehicle path, William kept glancing over his shoulder at the silent forest behind them. Nothing followed. No movement appeared between the trees. But later that night, when investigators reviewed the patrol's helmet camera footage, they discovered something chilling hidden in the background of the recording. During the moment when William had turned toward the bunker door, a small shape briefly appeared standing between two trees at the edge of the clearing. The figure looked no taller than a child, its outline partially distorted by the camera's low light sensor. Within a single frame, the figure seemed to tilt its head slightly toward the patrol team before disappearing back into the darkness of the forest. Some investigators believe the voices and footprints were simply illusions caused by radiation exposure affecting human perception. But others studying the footage believe something far stranger may exist within the poisoned wilderness of the Red Forest, something capable of copying the sounds of human voices to lure visitors deeper into the trees,